When will the nation be true to its name? Trail of tears, open veins. Stop the killings, SDK. Stop the killings, SDK. Stop the killings, SDK. Stop the killings, SDK. Stop the killings, SDK.
It's a never-ending war. Why they bombing us for? Gonna stand in the streets. We want justice, we want peace. Tell them don't shoot. Tell them don't shoot. Yeah. It's a never-ending war. Why they bombing us for? Gunners down in the streets. We want justice, we want peace. Tell them don't shoot. Tell them don't shoot.
Politicians saying sit down, compromise. Cause when they raid our homes, they harass our women too. A second quarter storm has set Makibaka on the news. And when we take an action, the movement keeps expanding. Reminds us that we're not alone, our unity makes it happen. The workers, the farmers, the teachers, the students, we all got a decisive role to build a stronger movement. And when we get tired, we lift each other up. Cause the masses making history from the bottom up.
Good evening to everyone tuned in right now. Our program will start in 5 minutes.
Our unity strong enough.
I just wanna hear your voice again. I just wanna hear you on the phone. I just wanna know that you're okay. I just wanna know you're coming home. You're coming home. Blood on your hands, blood on your hands. Where do you stand? Blood on your hands, blood on your hands. Where do you stand?
Again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We will begin shortly. In the meantime, please prepare your fan signs to say, "Stop the killings," and UN Human Rights Council investigate the human rights situation in the Philippines. We will be using it later in the program. Again, we will begin shortly at exactly, well, not 3 o'clock, but 3 o'clock in the Philippines, which is in around 4 or 5 minutes. Also, we would love if you could post on Facebook and Twitter later with hashtag HRC45, that's HRC45, and hashtag Stop the Killings Philippines. Again, please prepare your fan sign saying "Stop the Killings" and UN Human Rights Council investigate the human rights situation in the Philippines, which we will be using later on in the program. We will begin in approximately 3 minutes.
Hawaii and Puerto Rico, Palestine, the Philippines, we support the people. Self-determination is the key. International solidarity, Yemen, Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, Tunisia, Morocco to Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. Self-determination is the key. International solidarity.
Fam, you know I got your back. I see the ways in which they operate and attack. They colonize our people, so our people fighting back. And we fall and rise together like an Isan Baksa clap. Tell me all the facts and fuck the fake news. Duterte's flip-flopping and the people are confused. I take off my shoes, sandals or chanillas, throw them at the nearest dictator and I tell them RESISTING. Anything you do to them, you also do to me. RESISTING. That's the only way that our people can get free. It's a rock held firmly by a Palestinian's clenched fist, fighting for the land and the right for existence. Kasama take a riot shield down with a front kick. I'm talking about that global organized resistance.
We'll grow, we'll fight. Rise, resist, and unite. Unite. We'll grow, we'll fight. Rise, resist, and unite.
I got minerals, fruits, and vegetables. My dirt is pure. Maybe find some gold. See the rivers there. Walk on my home. How a foreigner come try to call their own. I provide for my whole family. That lights are brown, no canopy. We've been around many hundred years. Fought to keep woods laws right here on the Philippines. And it get real mean when a white man come to steal my things. Drilling holes where they shouldn't be. Taking lives with corrupt schemes. How a government train a government to kill the people that they supposed to protect. While all the money that people spend get taxed upon another war we in. We need a change, need to break the chains. Gotta claim what's ours, leave no remains. Blood of warrior in my veins, cause I have to fight to live another day. So we won't stop till we see the light. You can't keep us down no matter how you try. My people stand, my people rise. You won't keep us down no matter how you try.
We'll grow, we'll fight. Rise, resist, and unite. We'll grow, we'll fight. Rise, resist, and unite.
Friends and colleagues, welcome to the Solidarity event for the Global Day of Action against extrajudicial killings in the Philippines. It is 3 in the afternoon in Manila. I am Mitzi Janelle Tan of Agham Youth and Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, and I will be joined later by Wandarina of the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, or APWLD, who is in Thailand. The Global Day of Action is organized by Karapatan Alliance Philippines, National Union of Philippines Lawyers, Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment, 350.org Pilipinas, Ecumenical Voice for Human Rights and Peace in the Philippines, Civicus World Alliance for Citizen Participation, International Network for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Association of Women Rights in Development, International Association of Development Lawyers, Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, Asia Pacific Network of Environmental Defenders, and International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, World Organization Against Torture, and the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty. We are broadcasting live in more than 40 Facebook pages of organizations and media partners. The action is held today, September 14, as the United Nations Human Rights Council begins its 45th session. Last June, High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet delivered her report on the systematic and widespread human rights violations in the Philippines. She has recommended, among others, the consideration of options for international accountability, measures in the absence of clear and measurable outcomes from domestic mechanisms. Since then, the Philippines' human rights situation only continues to worsen, recently highlighted by the killings of activists Jory Porquia, Carlito Badlo, Randall Achanis, and Zara Alvarez, among others, while killings in line with the drug war continue in the middle of the public health crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic. To open this online solidarity event for this Global Day of Action, we have Cristina Palabay, Secretary General of the Human Rights Alliance in the Philippines, Karapatan.
Hindi pa ako nag-ano.
Again, we have Cristina Palabay, Secretary General of the Human Rights Alliance in the Philippines, to tell us more about what is happening in the Philippines today, to tell us more about the human rights violations, and to shed light on this very dark and horrible time and period in the Philippines. Later, we will like to remind everyone to use the hashtags HRC45 and hashtag StopTheKillingsPH.
Thank you, Michi. Friends, colleagues, and comrades, warmest greetings of solidarity and resistance to you all. At this very hour, the UN Human Rights Council will start its 45th session. And for our colleagues in Geneva, it would be a very busy week. We are anticipating a resolution that will be tabled on the human rights situation in the Philippines after the report of UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has been released and discussed in June this year. It is the worst of times. This resolution on this session comes 1 month after we received distressing news on the extrajudicial killings of peace consultant Randy Achanis and our dear colleague in Karapatan, Zara Alvarez. Their killing came after 9 more activists, including Jory Porquia and Carlito Badjon, and hundreds of others were killed since the start of this administration. It also comes at a time when Filipinos' freedom of expression and civil liberties have become more increasingly under siege, as poor sectors and communities express frustration, discontent, and disgust over the ineffective response of government on public health crisis and economic distress as amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. This comes at a time when our right to a free press has been many times attacked, with the shutdown of ABS-CBN, the continuing judicial harassment against Rappler, the threats and killings of journalists. Such resolution comes in the increasing use of the law, lawfare as it is called, against political dissenters and critics, such as in the case of Senator Laila de Lima, and the more than 500 political prisoners languishing in overcrowded jails across the country. It comes at a time when the so-called rule of law has starkly failed us in pursuing justice, when activists' plea for legal protection is undermined at the courts, and kin of drug war victims reach dead ends in pursuing prosecution and punishment of perpetrators of the killings. It is also a time when the law is used to go after the opposition and change makers through the Anti-Terror Act, when the law is being used to glorify butchers and plunderers like the dictator Marcos. It comes at a time when double standards of justice has never been so stark, especially with the release of a US soldier convicted for murder of a trans sister, and the so-called compassion for people in power who blatantly violate their own rules. This comes at a time of worsening impunity. But we are also facing the best of times. Now more than ever, these are times when our resolve, our courage, our commitment are tested and honed through fire. These are times when our forms of resistance in the courts, in parliaments, in workplaces, in schools, in farms, in the United Nations, in the International Criminal Court, in powerful waves of outcry and protest in the streets are manifested, and like waves of ocean between us, we are bound by our experiences and our power as peoples to defy tyrants and oppressors. On this global day of action, we wield this power, the power of solidarity, that is indeed stronger than tyrants like Duterte. We thank all the Philippine-based and international organizers, as well as the more than 600 organizations and individuals who are supporting this International Day of Action today. We call on the UN Human Rights Council to heed the reverberating call for an independent international investigation mechanism on the Philippines. We call on all friends, colleagues, and comrades all over the world to continue to stand with us, link your arms with us, sing our songs for freedom with us, and march with us. Stop the killings. Long live international solidarity.
Thank you, Christina, for reminding us of the power of the people and that united, the people will never be defeated. We next call on Jan Fermon, the Secretary General of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, an association of individual lawyers and judges, and regional and affiliated national lawyer and jurist associations from over 90 countries.
Dear friends, the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, the largest worldwide organization of progressive lawyers, founded in 1946 by lawyers who were active in the resistance against fascism, is a co-organizer of this day of global action against the killings in the Philippines. The IADL is honored to be on the side of the Filipino people and progressive activists, but we are of course also sad and angry that such a day of action against killings is necessary. The International Association of Democratic Lawyers has been following up the situation in the Philippines for many decades. Our local affiliate, the National Union of People's Lawyers, has untiringly brought to the attention of our organization the serious violations of fundamental rights committed by successive administrations in the Philippines. We have been acting to the best of our limited capacities to protest these violations and to bring them to the attention of the international public opinion and the fora in which we have a voice. The IADL has observer status in the UN ECOSOC and can for that reason participate as an NGO in the activities of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. The Philippines has unfortunately been on our agenda in the Human Rights Council on very numerous occasions. We have seen an indisputable intensification of serious violations of fundamental rights under the present administration, to the point where today we must without any doubt speak of crimes against humanity as defined by the Statute of the Tribunal of Nuremberg and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. That was also the conclusion of the session of the International People's Tribunal, held in Brussels, Belgium, in September 2018, in which IADL played an active role. The struggle we are waging, together with many other NGOs throughout the world, is first to stop the murderous frenzy of the Duterte administration. But it is also a commitment not to rest until all those involved in those hideous crimes will be held accountable and brought to justice. We are proud and honored to stand by the activists in the Philippines who risk their lives every day to defend people's rights on the ground. We are especially grateful to have amongst our members and friends the National Union of People's Lawyers, who fights for the rights of the Filipino people in an environment and a climate where such rights are every day more and more literally under fire. We are proud that our colleagues in the Philippines have decided to fight for every inch of ground in the battle for the rights of the Filipino people. We know that some of them have paid an extremely high price and even lost their lives in this battle. We pay tribute to them. It is our duty and our privilege to stand by them today and tomorrow. This is the meaning of our participation in this Global Day of Action. We say loud and clear, hands off the fundamental rights of the Filipino people. We will not rest until the killings stop and those responsible for the crimes are brought to justice. The Duterte regime can withdraw 1,000 times from the International Criminal Court, hoping that that will result in impunity for its crimes. We can assure you that it is just an illusion and that we will remind our governments everywhere in the world that it is their duty under international law to prosecute international crimes under universal jurisdiction. I'm sure this Global Day of Action will be a big success and will significantly increase the pressure on the Duterte regime to put immediately an end to its criminal activities. I greet you all on behalf of IADL and assure you of the solidarity of all our members. Thank you.
Thank you, Yan. As Yan said, we must all come together to put pressure on the UN and on the Duterte regime. Jory Porquia, a relief worker and longtime activist in Panay Island, was killed after initiating community kitchens during this health pandemic. Let us hear his son, Lian Porquia.
Thank you, Mitzi. Greetings of solidarity to everyone watching this live stream today. My name is Lian Porquia. I am the son of the slain activist Jory Porquia. Tatay, my father, is a human rights worker with the aspiration to help grassroots activism. He has this ambition to help urban poor communities survive the struggles of this pandemic. However, the realities of human rights in the Philippines, if we help the poor, we are vilified and red tagged. Worse, we are killed. When the government called for its people to unite amidst the pandemic, that is precisely what my father did. Augment the lack of support and social relief to the poorest of the poor. But what did state forces do? They placed him under surveillance, vilified him, red tagged as a communist, and a week after, the local police announced on the local radio that he is being placed under surveillance. After that, he was brutally killed. Initially, the report said that 9 bullets killed my father. After the autopsy, we found out that, in fact, there were 14 bullets that killed him. My father is alone. He was defenseless. All he wanted was to help the poor, fight for their rights, and provide them an opportunity to survive this pandemic. He organized community kitchen in the city, but what did the state do? After 4 months, we expect to have justice for my father. But in reality, even the justice system here in the Philippines has placed its toll on the family, friends, that even my younger sister and even my family, closest friends, are still being red tagged and vilified by state forces. It's very unfortunate and it's very tragic that for human rights worker like my father, like Tatay, all he wanted was to help the poor. But in reality, government forces are up all in their arms, putting in billions of pesos to fund anti-insurgency campaign and vilified activists, human rights workers like my father. So in behalf of my family, I appeal to all the member councils, to all the council members of the Human Rights Council, that we need to look into the situation of the human rights in the Philippines. There's a strong reality that human rights workers are being killed. We are easily red tagged and vilified. Your involvement in calling for the persecution of the Duterte regime will put an end to these killings in the Philippines. And I am very thankful for all the support and sympathy that all organizations, networks, and friends have given my family and my friends as well. Again, in behalf of Jory Porquia, I will fight for justice for my father. Even until the last day of my breath, I will make sure that we will find justice for him. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Tina, Yan, and Lian. Let us all honor the memory of Jory Porquia and all those all the activists whose lives have been taken away from us unjustly, by demanding change and accountability, and by calling for stop the killings in the Philippines and UN Human Rights Council investigate the human rights situation in the Philippines. So that's why we encourage everyone in the Zoom room and all watching via Facebook to prepare your signs later bearing the calls, stop the killings, and UN Human Rights Council investigate the human rights situation in the Philippines. We will be using these during the last part of our program. Next up, we have a special performance, a song by Chicago-based activists Love, Anthony, and Maya, entitled 1,000 More from the album Rock the Mic for Human Rights in the Philippines by the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines US chapter.
For every child killed, for every mother mourning, for every kid in Los Santos, for every life taken too soon, we raise our fists for you. The streets for you, for each one of us they take 1,000 more, will rise anew.
My heart is a burning city, wrapped by battle lines and body counts, by aerial bombs and the forced migration of migrant mothers who've only returned home to bury the children they left to feed. Kian Lloyd de Los Santos was 17 years old when the Philippine National Police put a gun in his hand and told him to run. Carl Angelo Arnaiz was 19 years old when they shot him handcuffed and kneeling. Ronaldo de Guzman was only 14 when they stabbed him 30 times for just being a witness. My heart is a raging fire for the names that keep coming, for the names I can't remember, for the names I won't forget.
For every child killed, for every mother mourning, for every kid in Los Santos, for every life taken too soon, we raise our fists for you, we march the streets for you, for each one of us they take 1,000 more, will rise anew.
And I am sitting in front of relatives, sweating away their humanity, wiping away the blood, saying, that's what you get when you don't listen to the cops, or, well, all this power to the people might get me killed, and I get that. But how worthless must his last breath be to you? Balancing is not just an act anymore when you're hiding behind an imported culture, because this is not what our history has taught us. No, not ours, because our culture has been rich with resistance for the past 500 years, from Lapu-Lapu to Gabriela Silang to the current people's movement. The Filipino masses have always fought back. Even the land is angry. Mount Mayon erupts for the mountains that have collapsed. The Asia-Pacific rim shakes for the dried rivers and poisoned waters. My heart is our revolution, bringing fire and brimstone, clenched fists and bolos against the corrupt politicians and their foreign puppet masters whose greed fuels this bloodshed.
For every mother mourning, for every kid in Los Santos, for every life taken too soon, we take up arms for you. Within the old, we'll build the new. We'll oust the
has brought dictators down, that will bring a dictator down, that is made of not only words but action. Have you forgotten your pain and the way it hungers for justice? Have you forgotten your anger and the pulse it leaves beneath your chest? Have you forgotten their names? Kian Lloyd de los Santos, 17 years old. Carl Angelo Arnaiz, 19 years old. Ronaldo de Guzman, 14 years old. There are too many names I can't remember. There are too many names I won't forget. There are too many migrant mothers coming back home to body bags. And I am sitting in front of relatives, sweating away their humanity, wiping away the blood. Have you forgotten your heart?
Thank you for that moving performance from Love, Anthony, and Maya. Let us all remember to keep fighting and to never forget. In 2019, the United Nations Human Rights Council again took notice of the extrajudicial killings in the Philippines and attacks against the Filipino people. Now, let us hear the solidarity messages from UN independent experts who have looked into several complaints and allegations of human rights violations in the Philippines. Some of them have become subjects of verbal insults and attacks themselves, but they have come out strongly in the interest of truth and accountability. We will hear first from a staunch partner of environmental and climate justice activists worldwide, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, Dr. David Boyd.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Richard Boyd. I'm the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and I'm joining you today from a small island on the west coast of Canada, across the Pacific Ocean from the Philippines. We both are so fortunate to live in beautiful countries on this beautiful planet, and it was with great sadness that I join you in celebrating this global day of action to stop the killings in the Philippines, the killings that are targeting human rights defenders, land defenders, environmental defenders, and these killings and the other forms of violence and harassment against human rights defenders are totally unacceptable. And the people who are carrying out these acts of violence, unfortunately, in the Philippines, seem to have immunity from prosecution. As my colleague, High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet said, there is a state of persistent impunity. And I want to say to you that I stand in solidarity with all of the passionate human rights defenders of the Philippines. These people are not terrorists or criminals. They are heroes for the planet, and we should celebrate them and not persecute them. Thank you very much, and best of luck on the Global Day of Action.
Thank you, UN Special Rapporteur Dr. David Boyd. Next, we hear from the most respected Irish human rights activist and currently the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. She was the founder and former executive director of Frontline Defenders. Friends, let us hear from Mary Lawler.
Hello, my name is Mary Lawler and I'm the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. I'm pleased to join this solidarity action in calling for an end to killings in the Philippines, but sorry that such action is needed. We know that the Philippines is a very dangerous country for human rights work, where people are targeted and killed every year for defending the rights of others peacefully. I receive a heartbreaking number of reports of death threats and murders of human rights defenders in the Philippines, simply because of their efforts to build a civil and just society. We know that over the last 5 years, many defenders have been killed, including 30 women human rights defenders. We know too that impunity for the murders of defenders drives more killings, and that the government is failing in its basic duty to protect defenders. And we know that the killings are often preceded by online smears and threats, and we are doing what we can to find ways to protect defenders in their work. We must not adjust to accepting these murders as normal or inevitable. They are not. They are committed by murderers who must be held accountable. And we'll do what we can to support you in your struggle for justice. Thank you for letting me speak today. I think about you often and stand in solidarity with those brave defenders doing dangerous work in a dangerous country.
Thank you, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders Mary Lawler. In 2018, UN Special Rapporteur on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers, Diego Garcia Sayan, conducted an academic visit to the Philippines, and President Duterte told him to go to hell for his statements, raising concerns on the killings of lawyers and judges in the Philippines. Unfazed by these inflammatory insults, Mr. Garcia Sayan has this message for all.
I want to express first my appreciation for being invited to join this campaign, Stop the Killings in the Philippines. The Philippines is suffering one of the most systematic and massive human rights violations in the world today. Thousands of people being killed in the name of citizen security or in the so-called war against drugs, which perhaps may bring some sensation of temporary security to some people, but in the mid and long run undermines institutions, concentrates power, eliminates checks and balances, and opens, obviously, several questions about what will be the future for citizen rights if what is happening today has the impact that everybody knows already. Obviously, this campaign must sustain in time. It's not an easy one to handle. So I first want to express my congratulations for it, my full support, and I hope that in this Human Rights Council that begins today, some specific decisions are taken to oriented to establish a systematic mechanism to investigate, to follow up what is happening in human rights, and to call the world for some action so that this kind of example doesn't repeat in other parts of the world. Example, quote, unquote. Congratulations again, and my full support as I have already expressed. Good day.
The next UN Special Rapporteur has been in the radar of the Philippine government for the past 4 years for speaking truth to power. Her years in working with activists in Amnesty International and Article 19 have certainly contributed to her incisive thoughts and analysis on the human rights situation worldwide. Colleagues, let us hear this message from Agnes Calamar, UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions.
Dear friends, dear colleagues in the Philippines, it is an honor to be joining you today, 14th of September, for this global day of action to call for an end to arbitrary killings in the Philippines. A couple of months ago, in front of the Human Rights Council, the UN human rights body presented a report on the situation in the Philippines. And that report confirmed everything that we, special rapporteurs, had highlighted and denounced for the last 4 years. It confirmed the widespread killings in the context of the war on drugs. It confirmed the killings against farmers and indigenous people, the killings of lawyers, the killings of human rights defenders. The report confirmed the silencing of independent media, critics, and members of the opposition. And importantly, the report confirmed the persistent impunity for those arbitrary deprivation of life. Sadly, but not surprisingly, since the report was issued, more killings have taken place, including that of human rights defenders. And they are the painful and saddest reminder that every day that passes by, there are more killings. And that's why the international community must act now. It must act in the context of its preventive mandate, and it must act decisively. Along with 32 other independent experts of the human rights system, I urge the Human Rights Council to, number one, establish an on-the-ground international investigation into the human rights situation in the Philippines. Number two, strengthen the mandate of the human rights body of the UN to continue its monitoring and reporting on the human rights violation in the Philippines. Number three, I call on the International Criminal Court to prioritize the completion of its preliminary examination of the situation in the Philippines. Along with 32 other independent experts of special procedures, I also call on member states to apply sanctions against individual Philippine officials who have committed, who have incited, or who have failed to investigate or prevent human rights violations, including arbitrary killings. The time to act is now. For the last 2 months, more people have lost their life, more human rights defenders, more victims among the poorest and most impoverished communities in the Philippines. I urge the Human Rights Council to hear the voice of civil society of the Philippines, to hear the voice of the families of the victims, to hear all of those who have lost loved ones in these senseless attacks against the most underprivileged and impoverished members of the Philippine society. Thank you very much.
Wow, the time to act is now. Those were powerful messages from UN Special Rapporteurs. Thank you for the support in our struggle to end extrajudicial killings and human rights violations in the Philippines. We will now hear from Bishop Antonio Ablon, who is part of the lobby and advocacy team of the Ecumenical Voice for Human Rights and Peace in the Philippines at the UN Human Rights Council and is currently based in Germany due to threats to his life.
Warmest greetings to everyone. Having ministered to the communities of peasant and indigenous peoples in the Philippines, especially in Mindanao, I am incredibly grateful and thankful to the UN Special Rapporteurs for consistently hearing our voices, our stories of repression and human rights violations, and our stories of resistance during these dark and difficult times under the Duterte administration. While seeking sanctuary from threats to my life here in Europe, I joined my colleagues in Karapatan and Ecumenical Voice for Human Rights and Peace in the Philippines in conducting advocacy and lobby work in the UN Human Rights Council. And during my first engagement, the Iceland-led resolution asking the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to, among others, submit a comprehensive report on the human rights situation in the Philippines was successfully adopted. After Ms. Bachelet's report, Iceland will once again try to bid for a resolution on the Philippines this session. As the 45th session of the UN Human Rights Council starts today, I must express my apprehension and grave doubts on what has been said or pledged by the Philippine government during the 44th session on the investigating body on drug-related killings in the Philippines, with the foreground that such killings, alongside the killings of activists, peace consultants, and political dissenters, continue to happen with impunity up to this day. I call on member states and observers of the UN Human Rights Council to know the facts and listen to the voices of the downtrodden and oppressed in the Philippines, amidst all the noise and distractions, and undertake the independent investigation on the human rights situation in the country. We do not want another Zara Alvarez, another Randall Ichanis, another Jury Porquia or Kian Lloyd de los Santos, another name added to the list of our fellow human rights defenders and citizens killed. The time to act is now. The time for solidarity is now. Long live international solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Ablon. Before we proceed with the solidarity messages from international solidarity partners and movements, let us hear a song on the need to carry on the fight amidst the extrajudicial killings of human rights workers, peasants, and indigenous peoples in the Philippines. Carry On is a song of Bootleg Orchestra and Free the Robots based in the US. Again, a single in the Rock the Mic album. Thank you, Bootleg Orchestra and Free the Robots. As they said, this is our time to struggle for justice, to see our people free. And we are seeing the Philippine movement, and not just the Philippine movement, but the solidarity of the entire world. Right now, we have over 300 people watching this global day of action for the Philippines, and we have over 700 orgs and individuals who signed our petition calling for the UN Human Rights Council to investigate the human rights situation in the Philippines. Thank you for everyone supporting this day of action for the Philippines. Now we will hear messages of solidarity from Philippine Senator Laila de Lima, who has been in jail since 2016. Her speech will be read by Leon Dulce, National Coordinator of Kalikasan.
From the office of Senator Laila de Lima, titled Stop the Killings, Message for the Global Day of Action on the Philippines. The Philippines is in a maelstrom of multiple and unprecedented crises. A pandemic still ravages the health and well-being of this nation of more than 100 million. A recession shatters tens of millions of jobs and businesses, while an abysmally inept and morally bankrupt leadership presides over a country whose last few vestiges of democracy and responsible governance have been massively corroding. But the catastrophe that has always been with us since day one, when Rodrigo Duterte took power as president, is the human rights calamity, the worst of its kind in Philippine history. It is prevalent as it is persistent, and it devours the very soul of our nation, disregarding the very dignity and worth of every human person, and obliterating the Filipino sacred ideals and traditions of due process and equality before the law. With no let-up for more than 4 years now, extrajudicial killings under Duterte's so-called war on drugs continue unabated. In her June 2020 report to the UN Human Rights Council, the High Commissioner for Human Rights found that these killings were indeed widespread and systematic, and that at least 8,663 mostly poor Filipinos had been killed, with other estimates, including that from the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, of more than triple that number. Under this climate of impunity, attacks against human rights defenders and critics of the government, activists, journalists, members of groups associated with the political left, and leaders of the opposition, the churches, trade unions, indigenous peoples, and peasant groups have been frequent and rampant as well. The High Commissioner verified the killings of 208 human rights defenders, journalists, and trade unionists, including 30 women. Just last month, in separate incidents, assailants brutally murdered Zara Alvarez, a paralegal for the human rights group Karapatan, and Randall Echanis, a leader of the peasant group Anak Pawis and a seasoned activist. Given the magnitude and relentlessness of the killings and other gross human rights violations, the High Commissioner, the CHR, and a number of UN Special Rapporteurs and many civil society organizations have been urging the UNHRC to establish an on-the-ground, independent, and impartial investigation into human rights abuses in the country. The experts have likewise appealed to the International Criminal Court to expedite and prioritize the completion of its preliminary examination of the situation in the Philippines. I joined the call for a UNHRC-led investigation and for expedited ICC process. I likewise appeal to different governments across the globe to immediately impose targeted sanctions, such as those provided by the Global Magnitsky Act and similar penalties, against abusive and corrupt Philippine government officials, and come to the aid of the Filipino people who have long been brutalized, terrorized, and abused by Duterte, his co-conspirators, and accomplices. In the absence of domestic accountability, I pray that global instruments of justice will commence the task of exacting criminal and moral responsibilities, ensuring redress for the victims and their families, and signaling a definite end to the mass atrocities. In the face of a disabled national government, I hope for an ever-growing and unstoppable network of individuals, groups, and peoples in the Philippines and abroad who are bound by solidarity and a collective struggle for common humanity and the dignity of the Filipino. Stop the killings, end impunity now, investigate Duterte.
Thank you, Leon and Senator Laila de Lima. Let us now hear from the European Members of Parliament, Hannah Newman, Bart Batenga, and Fernando Barrena.
15 years ago, I have been living and studying in the Philippines for a while. And since then, I am following closely the human rights situation in the country. And what has once been a very vibrant civil society is threatened since Duterte took power. The amount of human rights violations is massive. Tens of thousands of extrajudicial killings, crackdown on freedom of the press, so many human rights defenders being kidnapped or being killed, being abused. And I think that now more than ever, it is time that we shed light on what is happening in the Philippines. And that is why I call on all EU member states, on the European Union, but on governments all around the globe to make sure that there will be an independent and impartial UN investigation into the human rights situation in the Philippines. Democracy dies in darkness, and I really think we need to shed light on the situation.
My name is Mark Batenga. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the Workers' Party of Belgium. Like many of you, I've been shocked by the killings of land activist, peasant activist Randall Chanis and human rights defender Zara Alvarez. These killings are worrisome, all the more so because they come after these activists have been publicly vilified and labeled as terrorists by the authorities. These are not isolated cases. We see that attacks against activists, human rights defenders, land right activists, environmental defenders, political dissenters seem to be on the rise in the country. Therefore, I sincerely hope that the UN Human Rights Council will investigate the situation in the Philippines. On our side, we will discuss the situation in the Philippines in the European Parliament. These killings have to stop.
My name is Fernando Barrena. I belong to EH Bildu, a Basque political party, and I also am a member of the European Parliament myself. Just some words to support the September 14 Global Day of Action to call for an end to the killings. I think that it is mandatory to urge the United Nations Human Rights Council to investigate the human rights situation in the Philippines. And I would also like to support the huge task being done by the National Union of People's Lawyers and wish you all the success in your action.
Thank you to our MPs from the European Union. Now let us hear our progressive and supportive members of Parliament, Oyhana Estabarrieta of the Basque Parliament and Janet Rice, Tim Ayres, and Louise Pratt from the Australian Senate.
We support the Global Day of Action to call an end to the killings and to urge the UN Human Rights Council to investigate the human rights situation in the Philippines. Apoyamos el Día de Acción Global de llamamiento al fin de las muertes en Filipinas y pedimos al Consejo de Derechos Humanos de Naciones Unidas que investigue la situación en este país.
Hello, I'm Senator Janet Rice and I'm the Australian Greens spokesperson on Foreign Affairs. It is so important that the Human Rights Council investigate the situation in the Philippines as Duterte's brutal war on drugs continues and extrajudicial killings remain rife. In June, the UN found that thousands of people have been killed in the so-called war on drugs with impunity, and that police have been given permission to kill. So along with other Filipinos, human rights activists fear for their lives. Only a few weeks ago, human rights worker Zara Alvarez was fatally shot by unidentified gunmen. And this was separate to the killing of peasant leader Randall Chanis, who was also murdered. They were the 13th and the 14th human rights workers to be killed in the Philippines in the last 4 years, after being subject to so-called red tagging or political harassment. It is way beyond time that there was an independent investigation into these appalling systemic abuses.
I'm really pleased that the UN Committee on Human Rights is meeting to consider once again the situation in the Philippines. Union rights, the right to peaceful assembly, the right to organise are basic human rights, and it's really important that the United Nations continues to consider these issues in the Filipino context, keeps the pressure up for decent human rights, and importantly, keeps the pressure up for independent monitoring of human rights, the right to organise, the right for peaceful assembly in the Philippines, because it's in everybody's interests. It's in the interests of Filipinos, it's in the interests of the region that human rights be respected right across the region, always.
Hi, I'm Louise Pratt, Australian Senator. Today I join with others in the international community and from around the world to draw attention to the 44th session of the United Nations International Human Rights Council and their work to draw attention to human rights abuses in the Philippines. There's clear evidence that shows human rights abuses being perpetuated against women, unions, LGBTI communities, and a great many others. So today I call on the government of the Philippines and society there to respect human rights in their country. I call on the United Nations and nations all around the world to put pressure on the Philippines to uphold human rights for everyone in their nation.
Thank you for those progressive voices from the MPs supporting our struggles. Hello everyone from Thailand. I am Wardarina from Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, APWLD. We are the co-organizer of the Global Day of Action on the Philippines, and big thanks to Mitzi and all our powerful speakers today. We have more to come, definitely. And I want to say that I am very, very happy and mighty proud to join you today as the co-MC of this online program. As we know, Filipinas have endured gender-based violence, threats, and killings because of their staunch defense of women's rights and human rights. President Duterte has derided and demeaned Filipinas fighters and women because he probably knows the collective power of women alongside the people in challenging a patriarchal, macho-fascist, undoubtedly real misogynist like him. These fierce women are at the forefront of the fight to end the killings and other human rights violations in the Philippines. So now let us listen to this really, really strong, powerful sister. Our Filipina sister based in the US is Ruby Ibarra, Rocky Rivera, Classy, and Faith Santilla as they tell us the struggles and bravery of the Filipinas through the powerful song, Us.
Island woman rise, walang makakatigil. Brown woman rise, alamin ang iyong ugat. They got nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us. Island woman rise, walang makakatigil. Brown woman rise, alamin ang iyong ugat. They got nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us. Isang bagsak. Yo, fuck a story arc if it don't involve no matriarch. Some mothers work from the ground up, they craft in air like ATR with the butterfly sleeves. Naka-Philippine na pag nagsalita mga banat ay bala. Wag magtaka kung ako ay makatabulok na sistema. Kurakot sa pera bagsak, but we put in our heart into darkness. They putting these pigs in the office. Or you thinking you schooling but you hella lost cause you best see the boss while atop this. But look at my ate, she moving so cold. Can't hold a candle to her when she glow. Flick at the wrist with that elo she hold. Panago sa elo, she dripping in gold.
We pulling up in a jeepney. All of my soldiers greet me. Hand me bandanas and pull back my hammer. It's warfare when you see me. Skin you alive for my country. I live and die for my country. I kill a pig in a white hooded suit on the low for my country. They got evil plans in the devil's hands, but but I don't pray cause I organize. They got new ways to impose strength, but I teach mine how to mobilize. We don't fight for the money, for the greedy, for the white man. All we want is our freedom and the right to live on our motherland.
Island woman rise, walang makakatigil. Brown woman rise, alamin ang iyong ugat. They got nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us. Island woman rise, walang makakatigil. Brown woman rise, alamin ang iyong ugat. They got nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us. Isang bagsak, goddess of guerrilla warfare in every lifetime. We don't take no shit except an oppressor's lifeline. If you step out of your line, I will protect what's mine. Kahit merong rosaryo, sino magliligtas sa'yo? Puro dugo, pugot ulo, mulat sa dagat hanggang mundo. Proclaiming what's ours, the high and the low. These women are gods, you already know. We're deeper than water, they're in a village. The river runs red, you'll be dead in a minute. Like Nevis Fernandez, have you beheaded? Fuck with my tribe, quickly regret it.
Abani ko sa kamay, alisang mikropono sabay. At ang tapang ko, gaya ng inay. At halimaw nang sumasabay. Mga bara nyo lahat sablay. Mga rappers na puro bagay. Tinamaan ko lahat patay. Kaya walang mag-iingay. I got that Filipino phenotype. Kayo mag-i-mestizo white. But give me that moreno like that Rufio Aquino type. My lolas they be speaking like those Bali songs and bolo knife. I breathe the ether, need no hype. Two tongues are sharper with the mic. I need no in my history like from a land where readers weaving tight. They thieve until one piece of might just turn to see no light. Hacienda like Aquino, right? Rodrigo vigilante type. They kill my titles left and right. With smoking mirrors fill the night.
So let it be known, if you don't already, Pinayas have always been part and parcel, if not imperative and critical to the struggle. Filipinos are no strangers to wielding our own power. Of all the privileges that exist in this world, none of which you may be a benefactor of, there is at least one you bear, and that is the privilege of having been born a Filipina. Your DNA contains building blocks made from the mud of over 500 years of resistance and survival, and when you are ready, sis, we'll be right here, right here, right here.
Island woman rise, walang makakatigil. Brown woman rise, alamin ang iyong ugat. They got nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us. Island woman rise, walang makakatigil. Brown woman rise, alamin ang iyong ugat. They got nothing on us, nothing on us, nothing on us. Isang bagsak.
That was a powerhouse women beat rock artist Ruby Ibarra, Rocky Rivera, Classy, and Faith Santilla. Island women rise, walang makakapigi. Thank you, sister. Isang bagsak. Now, let us listen to the solidarity messages from our colleagues in the movements worldwide. We have so many. Their support and solidarity for efforts to campaign against the killings and in lobbying for the independent investigation on the human rights violation in the Philippines is truly important and phenomenal. Let us first hear from the co-organizers of the Global Day of Action. This is like Lisa John of Civicus, Ruben Kondrup of ESCRnet, and my dear colleague, Misan Wu of APWLD, and Gerald Storberg of OMCT.
Philippines is currently on the Civicus Monitor watch list. We have watched with grave concern the rapidly deteriorating state of civic freedoms in the country. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the conditions for the fulfillment of human rights have declined even further. We are calling on the Human Rights Council to take decisive action to correct the situation and extend its support and protection to civil society on the ground in the Philippines. We are deeply concerned for the safety of Civicus members and allies, many of whom have personally experienced incidents of intimidation and attack. We remember in particular Zara Alvarez, who was shot dead last month, brutally attacked, her tragic killing representative of a wider trend of intimidation and suppression of human rights defenders in the country. We are also calling on the government to immediately release all prisoners of conscience, including 62-year-old Teresita Naul, who has spent her life serving the poorest and the most marginalized. Her courage and commitment, and those of others like her, serve as an inspiration for the global human rights community across the world.
My name is Ruben and I work with ESCRnet. We're a global network of almost 300 organizations, social movements and individual advocates working to promote human rights. We're proud to stand with our members Karapatan and the wider human rights movement in the Philippines to demand an end to the killings and attacks on human rights defenders in the country. On behalf of our members, I want to express our profound solidarity with those of you that have lost loved ones, as well as our collective outrage at the continuous attacks and killings of human rights defenders in the Philippines. In addition to the killings, we also want to condemn the slander and the red tagging of activists in the country. This has created an extremely hostile and dangerous environment for those that defend human rights. We stand with Karapatan in their call for an international investigation into human rights violations and killings of human rights defenders in the Philippines.
I remember listening to Philip Alston about his visit to the Philippines in 2007. In his report as the then UN Special Rapporteur, he raised a grave concern over the killings of the peoples, especially by the death squad in Davao City. Over 13 years have passed since the very that day, but the human rights situation in the Philippines have only gone worse, especially since 2016. Even one killing is way too many. However, the government of the Philippines have killed, or at least condoned or allowed the killings of thousands of people, especially targeting farmers, indigenous peoples, critics, human rights defenders, activists, in the name of the war on drug without any accountability. At the same time, the government have also stepped up to oppress the voices of the people, especially the voices of dissent, through legislation, including the recent anti-terror law. Meanwhile, it also has withdrawn from international human rights obligations, including from the International Criminal Court. The killings, which is widespread and systemic, of the people in the Philippines must end right away. Impunity of such human rights violations must end right away. The people of the Philippines have waited way too long. Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, together with its over 280 members across 28 countries in Asia and the Pacific, call for international independent investigation into the human rights situation in the Philippines by the UN Human Rights Council. It's time for act now. APWLD stand in solidarity with the peoples in the Philippines.
My name is Gerald Sabok. I'm the Secretary General of the World Organization Against Torture, and it is my pleasure and honor to greet you on this Global Day of Action against extrajudicial killings, cold-blooded murder of innocent civilians in these times that we're facing. I think in any democracy, it is clear there's one baseline commonality, whatever our political divides, whatever our political positions. And that is human dignity, the protection from torture and abuse, and the protection from extrajudicial killings and murder by or on behalf or in acquiescence of the state. Those are the minimums, and those are the minimums we're asked to be complied with. It is not an acceptable new normal after years and years of killing innocent civilians that this is a new normal. And it is not acceptable that this is an issue of mere complete impunity. And I think it is also very important that the United Nations highest human rights body, who is convening today, the same day that you are celebrating and commemorating this day in the Philippines, takes finally action it ought to take for a long time. A decisive resolution, a decisive mandate of independent experts to investigate, secure the evidence, support victims, and ensure that those who are responsible can be brought to justice. Speaking about justice, it is unacceptable that the free medium is targeted through counterterrorism laws or others. It is unacceptable that those who defend rights, to whom victims can turn, that those are targeted too. And here I specifically wanted to mention the many defenders that have been killed, targeted and arrested over the years, but we also need accountability, justice for Sarah Alvarez and Randall Echanis. We will watch very carefully internationally how this will be done. This is an important day to commemorate the victims, to raise the awareness, and to rebuild the baseline consensus in any society that you simply can't just murder people as you wish. I thank Karapatan and all human rights organizations and defenders, whatever their spectrum is, in the Philippines and elsewhere, for their vital work. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, Ruben, Misan, and also Gerald for the very, very powerful message. We can hear them actually emphasizing again that we want decisive action from the Human Rights Council to take actions and end the killing and attack in the Philippines. The killing must end right away. Impunity must end right away. And then it's time to act now. Before we continue with the solidarity messages from our international partners, let us first watch a video tribute to martyrs of the Filipinos' people's struggle for genuine peace and freedom, produced by Kodao Production.
It's not the manner of death that makes someone
Such a powerful tribute video for all of those brave heroes, women and men, who have served the peoples and fought for justice, peace, and freedom. We will now hear from our friend Frank Chapman of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression in the US, who with other groups pushed for a similar resolution in the UNHRC against racism and police violence. And also we were going to hear from Bruce Van Voorhis of the Hong Kong Campaign for the Advancement of Human Rights and Peace in the Philippines.
Good evening, comrades. I'm Frank Chapman, Executive Director of the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression. We express our support for the global action against tyranny and killings in the Philippines that will take place on Monday, September the 14th. In the words of Samora Machel, fighting for the national liberation of the people of Mozambique, international solidarity is not an act of charity, it's an act of unity, of allies fighting on different terrains towards the same objectives. On behalf of the National Alliance, we condemn the widespread and systematic human rights violations in the Philippines. Like our people here, the Filipinos have experienced attacks against women, human rights leaders and defenders, indigenous people, LGBTQ activists, and others, while there is impunity for the police, military, and vigilantes. In the past 2 months, the human rights situation in the Philippines took a turn for the worse when the government enacted the Anti-Terror Act, which opened up further attacks on activists and protesters, including the murder of leaders of the peasants and the urban poor. We add our voice to the call for the United Nations Human Rights Council to exercise its mandate and openly create an independent and impartial investigation mechanism on the rampant extrajudicial killings and human rights violations in the Philippines. The National Alliance was the first organization in the movement here to take the epidemic of police torture to the United Nations. And we know that the exposing of the police state tactics in the Black and Latino communities here before on the international platform helped bring attention to our struggle. The National Alliance joins with all the various strands of the people's movement in solidarity with our comrades in the Philippines.
We at the Hong Kong Campaign for the Advancement of Human Rights and Peace in the Philippines join today's Global Day of Action with others in Geneva, in the Philippines, and elsewhere in the world, supporting the human rights of the people in the Philippines. For decades, people in the Philippines have suffered extrajudicial killings, disappearances, torture, illegal arrest, and many other human rights violations. Now, with the recent passage of the Anti-Terrorism Act, it's only expected that there will be even more human rights violations. It's for these reasons that the UN Human Rights Council must take action. It's been shown for a long time that the judicial system in the Philippines is incapable of rendering justice to its people. What is at stake is not only the credibility of the Philippine government, but also the credibility of the UN Human Rights Council. Because for what has been going on in the Philippines for decades has been a slap in the face of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all of the human rights covenants and conventions, and even the UN Human Rights Charter itself. We come today with others around the world to say enough is enough. There's been enough killing and enough human rights violations in the country.
Thank you, Frank and Bruce, for being with us in the struggles. We agree that enough is enough. Enough of the killing, enough of human rights violation in the Philippines. Let us hear now from Andrew Anderson from Frontline Defenders, Yifat Suskin from Madre, Hyun Soo Hwang of Korean Teachers and Workers Union and of Education International in South Korea.
Today, the UN Human Rights Council is opening its 45th session in Geneva. And we're joining with Karapatan and other human rights defenders in the Philippines in calling on the international community to focus their attention on the terrible rise in the number of killings of human rights defenders in that country. Last year, Frontline Defenders reported on the killing of 43 human rights defenders in the Philippines. And the recent killings this year of peasant rights advocate Randall Echanes, human rights defender Zara Alvarez, and relief worker Jore Porquia only highlight the increasing attacks against activists peacefully working to defend the rights of their communities. These killings are not random acts of violence. These human rights defenders were vilified, threatened, and tagged as terrorists by the authorities before they were murdered. The United Nations Human Rights Council must address this situation now before we lose another Zara Alvarez, another Randall Echanes, another Jore Porquia, another human rights defender to these cruel, widespread and systematic violations. Stop the killings.
As human rights workers in the Philippines come under attack, Madre stands in solidarity. We mourn the killing of Zara Alvarez, the 13th human rights worker for Karapatan, killed by the regime of Rodrigo Duterte. That government is waging a campaign of intimidation, harassment, threats against human rights workers to criminalize human rights work in the Philippines. The whole world is watching. We call on the UN Human Rights Council to investigate this crisis.
Dear brothers and sisters in the Philippines and all over the world, I'm Hyun Soo Hwang, International Director of the Korean Teachers and Education Workers Union, KTU. I would like to join the campaign of the Global Day of Action on 14 September 2020. I know that recently there have been increasing attacks and killings against the human rights defenders, civil society activists, journalists, lawyers, and activists for indigenous people in the Philippines. This is unbelievable and unacceptable in the democratic society. The government of the Philippines should take immediate action to end the killings and to end the indiscriminate violence against the human rights defenders and activists in the Philippines. I strongly urge the UN Human Rights Council to immediately monitor and investigate the cases of human rights violations against activists in the Philippines. The Korean Teachers and Education Workers Union, KTU, is participating in this global action too. We call on the Korean government, the current member of the UN Human Rights Council, to take a more active action and position on the human rights situations in the Philippines. The KTU expresses our deepest solidarity to all the brothers and sisters in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those powerful solidarity message, Andrew, Yifat, and Hyun Soo. We agree that the killings are not random. The government has systematically violated human rights. And with this global day of action, we want to say to the whole world again that the whole world is watching. Now let's hear the solidarity messages and songs from our friends and activists from FIFA Salute in Belgium. This is a really, really, really great video from them.
This is for the masses, for all those who have lost hope, for all the hardships and suffering, for all of our fallen comrades, for all those who have been buried by the system. Stop the killings. Justice now.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm from Brussels in Belgium. I'm a journalist at Solidaire newspaper here in Belgium. And I want to express all my solidarity with the struggle of the peoples in the Philippines. Tutte le genti che passeranno, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Tutte le genti che passeranno mi diranno che bel fiore, questo è il fiore del partigiano. Oh, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. E questo è il fiore del partigiano, morto per la libertà. And only fighters, and only fighters, and only fighters will be free.
Justice for Zara. Justice for all human rights defenders. Solidarity from Belgium. We are together with you, and only fighters win. So we work together and we support from Belgium. International solidarity. Mabuhay.
Great, amazing video from FIFA Salute. Long live international solidarity. The people have the power, and then we are together to fight for justice. And then if you heard that the song that was there also, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao, Ciao. We're going to also sing that later on. But now let us listen to the solidarity message from our fellow Asian activist, Tin Fong Chak of the Hong Kong Professional Teachers Union.
Brothers and sisters in Philippines, good afternoon. I'm Fong Chak, the Vice President from the Hong Kong Professional Teachers Union. I've heard that the Anti-Terror Act was signed in July. The act, which is strengthening the government power and violating human rights. In these 2 months, the excessive force of police, the execution, the attack on institution and workers' rights. Unfortunately, I have also heard that some of the activists were killed. It is all unacceptable. I'm here to present my hearty condolence and my anger with you all. We in Hong Kong share the sadness with you, and we are standing with you all. We believe that a strong civic society and separation of powers are the foundation of liberal democracy. The concentration of power, which would be the authoritarian government, is dangerous for its citizen. It has failed to protect the citizen. It has failed to protect the human right, and it will lead the society to demise. Death threats and threats of violence are not allowed in any circumstances. As a teacher, it is about what society we want to leave to our children and what value we want to teach our students. The only way to protect every individual and make society better is to respect human rights. State power should be controlled and balanced. What we need are accountability and judicial independence. What we need is a government that protects its citizens, but not attack. Hong Kong people have a deep relationship with Filipinos. We hope all our brothers and sisters are safe and be respected. The most important is we need to enjoy the freedom, the human rights, and the freedom from fear. We are here, we are asked for the Human Rights Council of the United Nations to create an independent investigation on human rights violence in Philippines. The government should also need to stop the violation and respond to the requests of its citizens. I am here on behalf of the Hong Kong Professional Teachers Union to stand solidarity with all our brothers and sisters in the Philippines. You are not alone. We are standing with you. Stop the human rights crisis. Stop the killings. Stop the human rights crisis. International solidarity. We are standing with you all.
Thank you for the solidarity from our friend in Hong Kong and share our rage and anger. Indeed, we hold the power and people's power to overcome oppression and state violence. And then, yes, we need government that protect, not government who attack. So let us watch right now this video, another video from our supporting organization from 350.org Pilipinas of environmental defenders and climate justice activists in the Philippines, where in July this year, they joined thousands to protest the draconian anti-terror legislation in the Philippines.
Nandito kami ngayon upang isingilin yung 4 na taon na pamumuno ng gobyernong Duterte, kung saan nakita natin yung pagdaos-dos ng kalagayan ng ating kapaligiran at klima.
Kami ay sumasama ngayon sa mobilisasyon ng SONA upang idala sa kalsada ang boses ng higit 20,000 tao mula sa iba't ibang sulok ng mundo na ipatigil na ang terror law.
Tayo ay humarap ng matitinding mga pag-atake sa karapatan ng mga tanggol kalikasan, kung saan unang nakapwesto ang Pilipinas as most dangerous country in the world noong 2019 para sa mga land and environment defenders. Umaabot na ng 157 na mga tanggol kalikasan ang pinapatay sa ilalim ng gobyernong Duterte at halos 20,000 ang iba't ibang mga pag-abuso sa karapatan ng mga tanggol kalikasan.
Makatarungan na ang laban natin at kasama natin ang buong mundo sa laban na ito. Dahil ang laban natin ay iisang pandaigdigang laban para sa iisang tahanan na ang ating mundo.
Ang aming presensya dito ay isang kolektibong paglaban para sa isang mundong mapayapa, sustainable, at may hustisya.
Kahit anong panunupil nila, lalo lang tayo lalakas. Kaya maghanda na sila dahil nangangalampag na ang buong mundo para sa hustisya. Maniningil na tayo sa mga taong nasa poder, sa mga kasalanan nila sa ating kabataan, kalikasan at bayan. We resist as one planet because we have a better world to win.
Kinakailangan ng sustainableng pamamaraan ng pagre-recover ng ating ekonomiya. Kailangan natin ng better normal kung saan yung ating mga industriya ay malinis, kung saan ang ating gawaing pang-ekonomiya ay naka-attune doon sa balanse ng mga ekosistema natin.
Thank you for that powerful video, 350.org Pilipinas. Indeed, we resist as one planet, and the activists in the video address the killings of environmental and land rights defenders, as well as the need for a better normal during this time of the pandemic. Let's watch this message again from our colleague in the climate justice and land rights advocacy and struggles to give their solidarity message to the Philippines. First, let us listen to Leah Alonzo of Asia Pacific Network of Environmental Defenders. Leah, the floor is yours.
The members of the Asia Pacific Network of Environment Defenders would like to extend our solidarity to the Filipino people in calling to stop the killings and for the UNHRC to conduct an investigation on the human rights violations. Many countries in the region have similar experiences and calls. The plunder of the natural resources in the Philippines have intensified, with only a few corporations and their cohorts in the government benefiting, while majority of the population are left to suffer its consequences. It is seen that the attacks on environmental defenders happen due to their opposition to these so-called development projects of the corporations, and communities point at state forces as the perpetrators. With this trend, the government should be held accountable for turning a blind eye on these attacks and actually being involved in many of them, and for not holding responsible these corporations involved. Even during the COVID-19 lockdown, there had been 2 killings of environmental defenders and 553 other cases of human rights violations. We also call for the justice and for the end of impunity for the killings of environmental defenders, common people like you and me, who support the call for the restoration of the ecological integrity and for upholding our right to our healthful and balanced ecology. They have risked their lives at the front lines of action to curb the impacts of climate change. They are the new heroes of our time. We have wept and we have grieved, and it's now time to fight back. As one country, together with the countries in the Asia Pacific and the international communities, we resist as one.
Thank you so much, Leah. That's a really, really strong message from the Asia Pacific Network of Environmental Defenders, or APNET. And then again, we resist as one, where we are actually resisting all those environmental defenders that has been killed even in this time of pandemic. So now we have another speakers. Let us hear from our anti-imperialist colleagues or comrades from Kenya, Gibson Maina, Chairperson of International League of People Struggles, Kenya.
I am Gibson Maina, Coordinator of Mathare Legal Aid and Human Rights Advocacy, and I am also the co-chair of the International League of People Struggle, ILPS Kenya. On behalf of the activists and the people of Kenya who believe in human rights and democracy, I would like to express our solidarity with the people of the Philippines who are fighting the severe political repression being unleashed by the government of Rodrigo Duterte. We condemn the numerous extrajudicial killings and human rights violations being committed by state forces against activists and the poor in the Philippines. We condemn the passage of the repressive anti-terrorism law and bloody and highly repressive rule of Duterte. The fight of the Filipino people is also the fight of the Kenyan people. In Kenya, as in the Philippines, there is extrajudicial killings of the poor and activists, and there is repression of voices of dissent. We, the people of Kenya, are linking arms with the people of the Philippines in standing for human rights and democracy. The justice system in the Philippines cannot be relied upon to stop the human rights violations and to mete out justice in an atmosphere of intimidation and weaponization of the justice system. We therefore support human rights and democratic organizations in the Philippines who are calling for a United Nations investigation into the human rights situation in the country. Solidarity with the people of the Philippines. Stop Duterte killings. Stop Duterte now. We call upon the United Nations to probe the human rights situations in the Philippines. Long live international solidarity.
Long live international solidarity, Gibson. Thank you so much for your solidarity message. We are here also to say that the injustices in one country is also injustices in others. And then the resistance of people in one country is also the same, the resistance of the people in other countries too. We are here to also to support the struggle and resistance of the people, including those in Kenya. Our land rights and environmental defenders are at the forefront of the struggle for a clean, healthy, and enabling environment for all in the planet. And in the peasant struggle for land is also at the core of the struggle against feudalism in the Philippines and elsewhere. Thank you to our fighters for land and planet. Before we proceed to solidarity messages of our international solidarity partners, let us first watch this video that I like so much. It's coming from the Shining Suns and Haranang Bayan, both based in the US, with their songs Our Time on the Need for Collective Resistance.
my people, y'all. Yeah, alright, yeah. This the anthem, freedom fighting, we gon' get it for the peasants and the workers that struggle for a living. Pull up on your block, it's megaphones and picket signs. Visualize liberation like a new pick design. Cause when we ain't unified, we fall victim to divide and conquer tactics of the system. The fashion state on some gang shit killing. They gon' try to silence us, but the whole world listens. We out to plead, gotta stop the killings, cause they fear this resistance, so they gunning down our children. They gooned up, call them government villains. Catch me building with my people, all up in your village. I'ma ride for the justice we all wanna see. For my comrades, Casamas and their families. I'ma ride for the peace we all wanna see. Every day struggle to be free, we just wanna be.
This is our time. Together we make history. If not us, then who will make the future that we wanna see? We've got to make the sacrifice and take on the fight. So greater than to give our lives to see our people free.
Hey, hey, hey. Listen up, y'all. Listen up, y'all. My people fed up, tired of this damn system. Bloodshed, too many tears, stop the killings. Living in poverty, families becoming victims. Puppet presidents ain't never gon' listen. While there's profit over people, the hood can't prosper. Stealing from the poor while the rich pumping dollars. From Luzon all the way down to Mindanao. Every barrio and village yelling, we want them out. The drug war, killings of indigenous leaders. Dropping bombs over schools and shooting down our teachers. Selling out our people and the land for the paper. Greedy money makers overthrow the dictator. Revolution's the answer, no hesitation. Peace can't be done without the liberation. We gotta act as one, can't lose a generation. Marching through the streets, protesting, no resting. Unite the working class and the rest who are oppressed. From the countryside to the cities, we can't neglect. So what you waiting for? It's about time to rise. People power number 3. Yeah, we living in a prime.
Shed tears cause they shed blood. Spread that red blood. Pick up what they meant done.
Like a guillotine.
Yes, this is our time. Together we make history. We need to take on the fight, protesting, no resting, to see our peoples free. So now we will watch another solidarity message from People's Lawyer, our dear partners in our defense for rights and liberty in the courts and in the parliament of the streets. We will hear from Aytaç Unsay from the Progressive Lawyer Association, CHD, Turkey, Max Botswana from the National Association of Democratic Lawyer, NADEL in South Africa, and also a song from Abah Lali Base Miondolo of South Africa, dedicated to Zara Alvarez, Randy Echanis, and all victims of extrajudicial killings in the Philippines.
A lawyer from Turkey who was in the hunger strike for 7 months for the right to have a fair trial. It's clear that our problems are common. Stop the killings in the Philippines. We are solidarity with the people in the Philippines who are fighting against the state terrorism. Solidarity, Philippines.
This is Max Bokwana from South Africa and the president of SADC Lawyers Association, which is an association of all the 15 countries on the southern part of Africa. We today wish to offer our solidarity and common support to the fighting people of the Philippines. We as South Africans have been the beneficiaries of the solidarity efforts by many countries who understood that injustice in one country is injustice everywhere. We have known fully well how it is to live under a regime who can no longer negotiate with its people but resorts to brute force and killing of its own citizens. We need to say today, the fighting people of the Philippines must never cease to fight, knowing that all of us throughout the world are behind them. So on this day of action, comrades, we wish you strength, we wish you tenacity, we wish you a clear vision, and we need to say you must never stop fighting until freedom, peace, justice, and prosperity prevails in the Philippines. Onward forever. Amandla.
Thank you, Aytaç from Turkey and Max from South Africa. And then we will not stop fighting, that's for sure. Amandla means power, a popular battle cry during the resistance against apartheid and the moving song from our friends from Myondolo. The song is respected like the country's national anthem is about the struggle against the apartheid. Yes, that's the song from Abalali-based Myondolo of South Africa, dedicated to Zara Alvarez, Randy Echanis, and all victims of the extrajudicial killings in the Philippines. We're now going to look again, our solidarity messages from our different partners and networks. Let's hear from the broadest solidarity network for the Philippines, the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, or ICHRP, which has journeyed and struggled with the Filipino people for so many years. The chairperson of its Global Council, Peter Murphy, gives voices to the need for greater solidarity amid these trying times for the Filipino people, and he represents the voices of solidarity groups in the Asia Pacific, Europe, Latin America, Africa, the US, and Canada. Friends, let us hear from Peter Murphy, who are now streaming live. Go for it, Peter.
Thank you very much, Wardarina. The International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines was launched in 2013 when political killings were surging under the Aquino presidency. But under President Duterte, the situation is far worse, and our coalition of faith-based trade union, lawyers associations, and human rights advocates outside the Philippines is calling for urgent and greater international solidarity with the Filipino people. This call has been answered by the United Nations Special Rapporteurs and by the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Human Rights Council. Our global rally today, the opening day of the 45th session of the Human Rights Council, is to urge them to go further in highlighting the ongoing outrages being perpetrated by the Duterte administration, even in this COVID-19 pandemic. We urge the International Criminal Court to expedite its preliminary assessment of the allegations against the Duterte government arising from the massive killing of civilians in the misnamed war on drugs. Greater action is needed because the new anti-terror law, the counterinsurgency program, and the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict are criminalizing trade union and peasant organization community relief work during the pandemic, Indigenous peoples' assertion of their basic rights to ancestral domain, and the Moro people's aspirations to self-determination, and the very work of monitoring human rights abuses. The red tagging of leaders from student age to old age is rampant, and it leads to political killing, as we have seen in these recent cases of Jory Poquia, Carlito Badion, Randall Achanas, and Zara Alvarez. Even during the pandemic, our movements around the world can take solidarity action by challenging the corporations which drive the development aggression in the Philippines, by challenging our governments which provide military and economic aid to the Duterte government, and challenging our governments to call out the Duterte government for its criminal abuses at the United Nations and all other international forums. We can all motivate more organizations and individuals in our own countries to speak out. We can mobilize financial resources for bail funds and court fees for those community leaders arrested on ludicrous false charges. What is happening in the Philippines is happening in many other countries. These basic human rights to life, to education, health, and to democratic freedoms belong to all of us, and they are under threat. Our strong action today on what we see in the Philippines is part of the global solidarity of all oppressed peoples everywhere. Let us reach out to each other in solidarity. Together, we are stronger than the worst tyrant. Stop the killings in the Philippines.
Thank you so much, Peter. Truly, the people's and our solidarity is stronger. We can see it now in this event where we can hear, all the voices from different countries globally. Even we are strongest, even against the worst tyrants, even against the worst corporation. Now, we're going to ask our friends in the Zoom, all of you, the Global Day of Action participants, to have your fan signs ready for our photo in a short while. So we're going to actually do that later on. So please make sure that you write it and then make it ready. And then before that, we're going to listen to, this is also my favorite song, 1,000 Voices of the Belgian People. And then you might heard it from the series movie Money Heist. Yeah, there's a series Money Heist, and then you can, it was also sang before, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao, Ciao. Yes, but this is actually the song on the resistance against fascism in Italy decades ago, which remains relevant to this day. So please sing along with me.
3, 4, via. Una mattina sono alzato. Oh, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao. Ciao, una mattina mi sono alzato e ho trovato l'invaso. Oh partigiano, portami via. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di morire. E se io muoio da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e se io muoio da partigiano, tu mi devi seppellire lassù in montagna. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e seppellire lassù in montagna sotto l'ombra di un bel fiore. E le genti che passeranno. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e le genti che passeranno mi diranno che bel fiore, e questo è il fiore del partigiano. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e questo è il fiore del partigiano. Molto bella libertà, e questo è il fiore del partigiano. Molto bella
That's amazing. I hope you join with me singing Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao, Ciao. Now I want to remind everyone to prepare your placards with a call, Stop Killings in the Philippines, or UN investigate human rights situation in Philippines, or any justice call you want to project. So it's very important for all of us, the one who are attending in Zoom, and also if you have placards, this is very important. If you have your placards right now ready, please click raise hand. There's a raise hand button in the Zoom, right? In the Zoom feature. Please click it so our technical team can see you. Yeah, we will all show our placards after the closing remarks. So again, please prepare for it. And then if you already have it, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature so our technical support can see you. Now, to close this program, oh my God, this is like almost the end. We call on Edre Olalia of the National Union of People's Lawyer, International Association of Democratic Lawyers, and of ECU Voice. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rina. Amadla and Bella Ciao. What else can we say? We all heard the voices from Belgium to Turkey, from Switzerland to South Africa, indeed, from Australia to Zambia. The voices are passionate and powerful about a people under siege who dare to resist, who dare to struggle, about the victims, from the hapless to the helpless, from the best to the brightest, the boldest and the bravest, of people who are with us, of people who are us. And yet, you all continue to stand by us. It is this borderless collective sense of community and solidarity that stokes the fire in the belly, raging against the dying of the light, against the terrorism of tyrants in our midst. We shall tirelessly push back and stand our ground against attacks on human rights and basic human dignity, against dictatorship and impunity. We will seek refuge in the UN, in the courts, in the parliament, in the communities, in the streets, and elsewhere. We shall avail of various and complementary arenas of struggle, including the Council's present 45th session, the UN mechanisms, mandates, and treaty bodies, especially when domestic remedies are not only passive and frustrating to many, but even fruitless and ineffective in exacting responsibility and instituting concrete and positive measures. Make no mistake about it. We will not stop until the brutal killings, the horrific torture, the trump-up arrests, the vicious vilification, and persecution stop. Until there is justice, whenever, wherever, so that those who should be accountable will hear the people sing and hear the voices of angry women and men loud and clear. Indeed, there will be no peace if there is no justice. Stop the killings. Makibaka. Thank you and carry on. Salamat po.
Thank you, Edre, for that powerful call and message. We now call on our friends in the Zoom room to turn on your cameras. Show your fan signs or placards on your screen as we are going to take a picture of all of us gathered today for this event. Please take a picture of yourself later for those and post it also in Facebook and Twitter. This is very important for us with your message and hashtags Stop the Killings PH or HRC 45. May we also invite our friends watching on Facebook to join us in our calls. Those who are in the Zoom room, please hold your placards and or raise your clenched fists. So you need to raise your clenched fists as we have our collective chant. Okay, so are we going to take a picture now? Yeah, we're going to take a picture now together. Yes, we can see all of us. That's great. So let me know from the tech support if we are okay now. Have we take a picture of ourselves? All right. So now I'm also going to, while we are clenching our fists, as we have our collective chant, of course, that you're really familiar with this one. When I say, no justice, no peace, you will say, stop the killings in the Philippines. All right. So I'm going to lead the chant together. Okay. And then we're going to do it together. All right. No justice, no peace.
Stop the killings in the Philippines.
Amazing. No justice, no peace.
No killings in the Philippines.
No justice, no peace.
Stop the killings in the Philippines. Stop the killings in the Philippines. Stop the killings in the Philippines.
Try it again one more time, friends. One more time. Because we want to make the Human Rights Council to listen. And this is our call to the Philippine government and the UN Human Rights Council. So please shout out, no justice, no peace.
Stop the killings in the Philippines.
Thank you everyone for joining us in today's online solidarity program for the Philippines. On behalf of all the organizers, supporters, and solidarity groups for the Philippines, our deepest appreciation for your solidarity. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. Our program will be closed by this excellent recent remix of the song Rage, originally performed by one of the best bands in the Philippines, The Jerks. So please together, rage with us, resist with us. Long live international solidarity!
Long live
international solidarity.
Knocking on cars till the morning light. People standing in line for a kilo of rice. Welcome to the dark ages, the era of lies. Dreams of progress, our visions gone mad.
All are still drenched with innocent blood.
Demolition men rumble through Smoky Mountain homes.
Darkness indeed, justice, just indeed.
But I go out gently into the night. Rage against the dying of the light. Sing a song about this terrible sight. Rage until the lightning strikes.
Go now gently, go now gently, go now gently and rage with me.
Go not gently, go not gently, go not gently and rage with me.
And the tyrants change,
But poverty, pain, and murder remains.
the voices of truth are locked up in chains. Darkness remains, the yearning flames.
But I go not gently into the night. Rage, dying on the light. Sing a song about this terrible sight. Rage until the lightning strikes.
Go not gently, go not gently,
Go not gently and rage.
We